Gen Z is saying it's not cool to wear tank tops anymore. And how dare those little freaks? My daddy wore a tank top, as did his daddy before him, and all of their daddies going straight back to the revolution. This is going to demand an all caps post to Twitter. Maybe you've been scrolling through Facebook and have seen similar articles pop up. Maybe you remember news stories bashing millennials for being lazy or entitled. I feel like we all have, even if we can't recall the exact subject or size specific example. But the reality is that you probably have a perception about generations, maybe even your own generation, that has been heavily influenced by the media. Just last month, I saw a guy in some random Facebook post talking about how, unlike other millennials, I actually have a job. And I remember thinking, aside from the feeling like I've heard this rhetoric before, aside from the fact that most millennials do, objectively, in fact, have jobs, the fact that this hate mongering even turns people against the peers they most closely identify with is exceedingly disturbing. Not long ago, I had an article from Culture Insider pop up in my Facebook newsfeed, and the article was talking about how Gen Z is bringing back wired earbuds so as not to look like finance bros. What the story ultimately amounted to was a random guy at Wall Street Journal told Business Insider that because a few celebrities recorded a few videos with wired earbuds, it means that the whole of Gen Z is doing something for an oddly specific reason. A reason which is only given the slightest bit of credibility by one C-list celebrity who is literally right at the uppermost cutoff of actually being Gen Z. I'm not sure if it will come as a shock to you or not, but the point of this story isn't about having your finger on the pulse of fashion. It isn't about earbuds at all. Like the fictitious example I started the video with, the point is to make people who aren't a part of Gen Z defensive, if not outright angry. It's designed to make you say the specific words, "Why do I care what Gen Z thinks?" Its aim is to create hostility at the thought of Gen Z being able to determine what is or isn't cool when, somewhere around 1,000 years ago, that used to be your place. This is a concept which has been around for at least as long as written history has been a thing. Even Aristotle is on record complaining about those darned kids. And I'm not going to make any claims as to whether or not the war between the generations has gotten worse over the years because, well, it's completely irrelevant. Now, a generation is an exceedingly poorly defined concept that can mean a lot of different things depending on context. But in its most common usage today, it refers to any specific age group in which we've lumped all of the members together because of shared experiences or circumstances. Starting with the Lost Generation, born between 1883 and 1900 and falling through 6 more named generations until we arrive at Gen Alpha, which is a group of children born in the early 2010s, let's pause there for a moment. Because the early 2010s sounds a lot less like a specific date and more like a guideline. It should start to make one wonder who sets these dates, and what is it that defines when one generation ends and another one begins? It may or may not surprise you again to know that neither of those two questions have a definitive answer. The baby boomer generation, for example, lasted from 1946 until 1964. Unless you ask the people who say it lasted from 43 to 60, or the ones who say it lasted from 1946 to 1973. As you can probably tell, this isn't an exact science we're dealing with here. The way in which we try to define generations is a more subjective thing than not, and it depends almost entirely on where you are in the world. If we're going to talk about Gen Z, and you're to find out that they're defined as a generation which grew up with access to the internet, you're going to figure out pretty quickly that there are places in the world which, still to this day, barely have any internet access to speak of. So when you try to pin down the starting date as 1997, well, how much of the world actually had internet access in 1997? Short answer, not very many. So we're defining what a generation is by things which are greatly dependent upon where you live, and oftentimes depending upon your social economic class as well. It sounds like a pretty lousy thing to put too much stock in, if I'm to be honest with you, but here we are. Now, I was born in 1984, so depending on who you ask, I'm a millennial. And I say depending on who you ask because some say the cutoff is 85 while others say 81, but I digress. The only thing I've actually taken away from being placed in that category is that I've never really appreciated being a member of one of the most hated generations alive today. At least the most hated generation so far. I didn't much like being called lazy back when I was showing up for work an hour early every day. I don't really like being thought of as entitled, as I'm presently doing this with a million other side projects, constantly hoping that I can find a way to make a living within the confines of my disability. And I don't like the fact that I'm seeing the same rhetoric that was used on a smear campaign against one of the hardest working generations in modern history being started up again today against a generation which has only just entered post-college adulthood, namely Gen Z. Now, if you like some examples of what I'm talking about, we have this right here, which is almost seemingly innocuous until you realize that when taken on the whole, it's basically what amounts to an attack on everything my generation supposedly ever held dear, which is naturally going to stir up some comment section drama. Or there's this one from The Print, or there's this from Bored Panda, or the 5 millionth BuzzFeed article I've seen in the last 5 seconds alone. The list keeps going on, and it reminds me a lot, and by a lot, I mean almost exactly like what the TV media in particular did between boomers and millennials 2 decades ago. But why? Why does it seem like the media is intent on pitting generations against each other? My first thought here is that they post an article like this, they get people who have the same knee-jerk reaction I described at the beginning of this video. That reaction goes into the comments section along with a few thousand others from pissed off people with too much time on their hands, which makes the article show up more and more in people's feeds because that's how algorithms work, which translates to more clicks and thus more ad revenue. But what about the time before the internet when this type of generational sparring was still going on? And part of it does come naturally, I'm sure. It's bloody hard to see eye to eye with a generation that allowed something like segregation to exist. As time marches forward, humans have become more connected and more exposed to a wider range of cultures, lifestyles, and in general things which deviate from what was once considered the norms of society. When I was growing up, being an openly gay person while still in high school was damn near unthinkable. And while bullying and homophobia certainly still exist, being gay is far more accepted than it once was. But that level of acceptance has a tendency to trail off when you start looking for it with older and older people. So yeah, there is a cultural divide. I'm on social media daily, my mother is on occasionally, and my grandfather has literally never had a computer or smartphone in his home. We've unquestionably had different experiences in life which have shaped our understanding and outlooks of the world. But we aren't arguing about how cool it is to have a side part. There are cultural divides, then there's just stirring up drama with things that truly don't matter to anyone. I personally couldn't be paid to care what any other generation thinks about my clothes. 90% of all my videos have been shot with me wearing the same black robe. I own 2 of them. They're identical. I have 5 of the exact same tank top and 3 pairs of the exact same pants. My out-of-the-house clothes consist of plain black and plain white shirts. I dress for my own comfort, because I'm the one who has to wear them. I'm a 37-year-old disabled guy who makes some YouTube videos. I've been married for a decade, and to sum all of this up, I don't really need to impress anyone. When I had long hair, I didn't rightly care that some old folks thought it made me look like a hippie. I don't rightly care today if a 10-year-old thinks my glasses aren't trendy enough. And the reason why I don't care is hopefully for the same reason why most of you wouldn't either. In short, because real life marches on. Very frequently people lose sight of a very basic fact of reality on this planet that most of us are just ordinary people trying to get by. Bills need paying, children need raising, and so on. Media outlets prey on the notion that there are people out there who aren't working as hard as you, who don't value the same things as you, who do less but expect more. This is never really the case though. Sure, certain things of long masqueraded as values get recognized as being unnecessary or occasionally utterly atrocious. For example, the notion that a woman's place is in the kitchen seemed like an unshakable core value of life as we knew it, until people realized that women staying home while the husband worked was really only a popular concept for about 100 non-consecutive years of all of human history. So while some people saw women re-entering the workforce as an attack on civil society and possibly an all-out assault on the American way of life by a younger generation, others merely saw it as a return to normalcy. The point I'm trying to make is that those things aren't values so much as deliberately constructed power dynamics that those with said power have tried to portray as being as natural as dogs and cats hating each other. So what differences do we really have? What truly separates me, a millennial, from anyone else? Past circumstances have certainly shaped our lives in different ways. I recognize that a boomer has had more opportunity to go to college without incurring lifelong crippling debt, and can simultaneously recognize that I had all of the business generating possibilities of the internet available to me from the time I was 18, and that an 8-year-old member of Gen Alpha can already be pulling in 6 figures from YouTube. None of that changes the fact that I don't shy away from dedicating myself to my passions or obligations any more so than you do. I don't half-ass things I'm able to do in life. I judge people based on their merits just like any other reasonable person would do. As far as I can tell, and my ultimate conclusion on this subject, is that while each generation on the whole has some differences with every generation which has come before or since, we have more similarities than not. And it isn't cool to have our differences picked apart and magnified for the sake of ad revenue or to sell a magazine. It doesn't even matter the motivations of those who create the discord they seem so intent on proliferating. What matters is that we remember that we're all just sailors on the same treacherous-ass seas. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and maybe even subscribe. I try to release a video every week on a rare ailment or infrequently discussed cultural topic, and I'd like to think I keep getting better at it. So until next time.